done the slap, now do the clap.
So, Matt, I'd love to kick off with you and ask, I mean, as a director, you've got a lead who also wrote the film and is a producer.
Yep.
I mean, does that make it any more complicated to deal with?
Actually makes it simpler, you know, rather than talking to three knuckleheads, you only get to deal with one. No, not at all. It's actually, it's great just to be able to go to the source, you know, to have the guy on set who first imagined the piece and the characters and have a direct conversation.
And Joe, I mean, where did this all come from originally? I mean, what was your inspiration behind Felony originally?
Well, you know, it first started with this sort of dilemma of this character who commits this sort of crime, but the real crime to me is the way he handles the aftermath. So he causes this damage in this accident to a child and then doesn't own his actions afterwards and lies about it. And I was reading these stories constantly in the newspaper and I saw it as a great launching point for a story. But the real story came in once I realised that the real story was not just that person's dilemma, but the reactions and the way it affected all those people around him. And which became a real kind of a thriller, yes, and a cracking story, but a debate of ethics. Based on age and point of view and all sorts of things.
Oh, it's interesting because Malcolm, the character, like the police help him.
Yeah.
Do it in the first place, and then his wife, and then Carl, everyone's helping him keep the life.
Yeah, and it's one thing that always fascinated me too, is at the end of the day, the real sense of your own redemption, forgiveness, and whatever path it is that allows you to rejoin the human race after you've committed or done something terrible. I feel at the end of the day that has to be left to yourself. Really the real court case you have is in your own head. Yeah. So it's interesting that the doors are constantly left open by all those characters around. It's like, well, I'm not going to make it easy for you and put you in prison, and I'm not going to make it easy for you and tell you agree that you should turn yourself in. You have to decide that, and that's where I think that comes from.
And Matt, so where did you come in to the project as director?
Joel first contacted me in 2008. He'd seen Noise and liked it. And
loved it.
Thank you.
Great film. Great film.
And I'd just seen The Square.
Yeah.
And asked if I'd like to read a script, so of course. I'd never met Joel before, but of course I'd known of his work. And knew he could write because I'd seen The Square. And then we went through about a 3.5, 4 year period of sort of on-off development. And we both had other projects, going obviously. But every 3 months or so, Joel would give me a call, would say, I'm in town. And we spent a few days together and just worked through the script.
Yeah, I really wanted to hunt Matthew down to direct this movie. I've got a lot of friends and affiliates, obviously through Blue Tongue that I work with a lot, but they're all developing their own stories. So when I had this script, it felt to me like I had to go and get someone outside the gang.
Yeah.
And Matthew was a guy. I got two things I really wanted in this film. My first choices, which is rare to get just in general in life, and one of them was the director and the other was Tom playing Carl.
I was going to ask you about Tom. I mean, number one, it's a regular quote now. I've read a lot of him saying he had no interest in coming to Australia until he read the script, and then he just couldn't not come.
Yeah.
I mean, as a writer, number one, that must be pretty cool.
Yeah, that was one of those sort of, I could die right now and I'll be happy moments, because it was one of my favourite actors giving me a compliment. So yeah, and he was amazing, from the start to the finish. And even now, having in his support of the film, I think he just loved the world, the character, the team involved, and he, as he said, begrudgingly, it dragged him to Australia.
And both of you, what was he like to work with? Once he arrived on set, that must have been a pretty...
It was pretty daunting at first, but he's just a working actor. You just knuckle down and do the work, and it's not in his best interest. He understands it's not in his best interest to work with a director that, you know, can't communicate with him on an equal footing. Yeah. So, you know, he was at pains sometimes to tell me, you can direct me, Matthew. You can criticise me if you like. And
I won't listen, but you can go through
you
the
can
motions.
try. Yeah, and I was like, well, it's pretty hard to kind of come up with a criticism of his work.
Well, he's right, Matthew's so right. He's such a hard-working actor. He makes it. I mean, they're the great people. Kate Blanchett's like that as well to me. She's like, has an incredible ability to make everything seem so effortless, and yet that's true. But what goes behind the scenes is an incredible amount of detailed, considered thought and work.
And I mean, as a writer, you've got Tom on set. I mean, if he improvised or went on a slightly different tangent than you would expect, are you precious with your words, or were you like, what did he?
Well, nearly every movie I've ever worked on, actors just suddenly take on partial duty as a writer, just in the moment. I'm going to say this. I don't care what it says. I'm going to say this. Tom never did that. And in fact, if he ever wanted to change a word, he would come to me and go, I was thinking this, and this word doesn't make, maybe this is more appropriate. What do you think? And I'd be like, yeah. And then he'd go to Matthew and say, Matthew, I think this. And he would defer to us without making some sort of immediate change. And he would turn up for work like these, you know, the scenes, there's quite long speeches he makes, word for word, you know.
Yeah.
Rehearsal, word for word.
I mean, he makes it look easy because he works so hard. Yeah. You know, and I think of all of the cast, I think you were the one that sort of mucked around with the words more than anybody.
I actually felt, this is true, in a couple of scenes, I felt embarrassed that I was paraphrasing the script, which I had written, far more than anybody else, and particularly with Tom, because he was so precise, that I felt ashamed. True.
And what did you both think of his Aussie accent when he...
Well, we didn't actually ask him to do strictly, you know, an Aussie accent. The way that we sort of thought about the character when we were thinking, you know, when we thought Tom, was that he was, you know, one of those 10-pound poms that came, you know, he came. We sort of figured he came in the mid-70s or something, you know, and then
so
over
an
the
infusion
years,
of Australian superimposed over the British,
yeah,
which is an accent challenge far greater than just doing a straight accent, I think.
Because you've got to sort of plot out what words in your vocabulary actually got influenced by what's
the percentage and degrees of it.
Yeah,
I thought it was awesome, and it was like, you know, with a guy like him, it's not. It's so, I keep saying, you know, you get these actors where young, starting out type actors, you can just go, oh, well, you've got to show us the accent now ahead of time. But with certain other actors, there's this unwritten rule of respect where you go, I trust you, so we'll just turn up on day one and see how it goes. So there's a bit of that going on. But, you know,
that was also what, you know, attracted, one of the things that attracted Tom to the role is that, you know, because an actor like that loves a challenge. Yeah. And I said, and he one of his stocks in trades is accents. You know, he's got such an uncanny ability to.
When I spoke to him on set and he was asking about the accent, and he just went, well, "Yeah, that's all I do."
Yeah,
I do. Part of his job. Yeah.
I can do accents. It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the tools, right, that you've got to learn to use.
What was that story you told me about Ray Winston? Was it Ray Winston?
Yeah, Ray Winston says, he says, I'm really good at accents. He says, I can do 4 of them: North London, South London, East London, West London.
Obviously, Joel, you've been in Hollywood a lot, making these bigger movies, and it sounds like every so often you've been dipping your toes back into Felony. So was it always a case that you wanted to come back to Australia to make Felony, and did you always see it as a Sydney film?
Pretty much always. There was a window where one person with money, and it's because, you know, you're always sort of trying to partner with people with money so you can get them made. Was like, have you ever thought about this being an American movie? And I was like, oh, no, I hadn't really thought about that, but I will think about it if you'll open your checkbook. And I started drafting a version of the script which was set in Washington, D.C., because I'd spent a lot of time there at one point. And about a third of the way in, I just thought, I can't do this. It doesn't feel right. It just sounded like these were Australian people to me, with Australian voices that I was familiar with. And yes, it's a universal story, and I think people in any corner of the world should relate to it.
Yeah.
But the telling of it, to me, felt like its original version was right, and to deviate from that would be wrong.